Joining us here in our UFO festival studios here is Mark Chesney, who's a UFO researcher, former NASA employee as well here.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us here this morning, sir.
It's hard to follow Don Schmidt, but I'll do my best.
I apologize. You had a big lead in there. Yeah, that's kind of a big deal there. But you've worked with Don for many years as well,
I worked with
too.
Don. Don and I both used to work for Dr. J. Allen Hynek at Northwestern University, who also was the Air Force main consultant for Project Blue Book back through the end of the 60s. So I met Don through Dr. Hynek about 40 years ago.
And then the rest is kind of just history there.
Sort of, yeah. And then in '89, Don and his colleague Kevin Randall came here. Ostensibly, they were going to do a story about how the Roswell thing was kind of crazy and exaggerated. There was literally nothing to it. That was the intention.
Okay.
But
set
obviously,
kind of to downplay it.
Set out for skepticism,
Yeah, it was a debunking thing, basically, because it's like, well, we're serious researchers, so nothing could have happened. Well, it seems like something did. And so in 30 years ago, in like 91 or so, I was working at NASA. I was at NASA in Houston. I was working space shuttle safety engineering kind of stuff.
Okay.
But that's relatively close. And Southwest Airlines was so inexpensive back then that I would come here on weekends like 3 times a month and meet Don and Kevin and go interview. Everybody was still around then. Walter Hout, Glenn Dennis, Frank Kaufman. They were all around.
Okay.
So we were the first contact people where they would talk and
so for you, like in your. It was almost like the team, the group, the research group there, the team.
Right, yeah.
So with NASA, was yours kind of on the, like your perspective, was it an engineering perspective?
Yes.
On a lot of
Yeah, I'm an engineer. I'm an airospace engineer.
Gotcha. So you're looking at it evidence-wise from that engineering
nuts and
side.
bolts, yeah. What inspired me was, if you remember way back to 1969, the first person on the moon was Neil Armstrong. Mm-hmm. He was a Purdue engineer, so I went to Purdue because of that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Wow.
That was the motivation. So very cool. So like you said, and like Don said, it's all coming from a place of skepticism.
Yes.
And so what was it? Was it a gradual, like as you're digging and finding different things that you can't explain? Is that? Or was it a light bulb like from no to yes?
No, I think it was more gradual. Everybody initially, the core group, we're all connected to Dr. Hynek, and we'd known Dr. Hynek. Now, Hynek died in '85 of brain cancer, unfortunately. But we had been connected before that through, because there still exists. It's called the Center for UFO Studies. It's in Chicago.
Okay.
And we were all affiliated with the Center for UFO Studies. And some were science people, some were, I was an engineer, different areas of expertise, but everybody was interested in this kind of stuff. So we started to come down here, and it was like, oh, that can't be true, because I think the first, I think, was a Charles Berlitz book about the crash at Roswell, which I think came out in maybe 1980 or so.
Okay.
I think it was 80, because I was doing some corporate training out in the East Coast, and his book had just come out. It was already remaindered for like $1. So I bought it because I had nothing to do.
Right.
So, and because of that book, it's like, well, that's so extreme that photos of bodies, So we thought, well, this will be easy.
Sure.
It wasn't easy. I mean, something definitely happened here. It definitely happened here. In the 90s. We authored a number of articles in the Center for UFO Studies publications. Was called the International UFO Reporter, IUR, because the Air Force and the government they released Air Force released 2 studies about the Roswell crash, and they kept changing their explanation. And the General Accounting Office released a study too, all in the early 90s. So we wrote articles debunking it because, it's been a number of years, but the initial Air Force response was like, well, it was a weather balloon, a mogul balloon, which really wasn't weather. It was a high-altitude nuclear test eavesdropping thing to listen to Russian tests.
Soviets,
Yeah. So, and that lasted for about a year and a half. It was a weather balloon because they had pictures, because they were launched from El Magordo. So
there was some plausibility to that.
Well, yeah, because, there's so much aerospace and NASA stuff here with White Sands,
Yeah, there's all kind of secret squirrel stuff going on out in the,
and
in the
even
deserts of New
and also
Mexico.
real development stuff too.
Yeah.
So we wrote rebuttals to that, and within 2 years, the Air Force responded and go, oh wait, we're sorry, we don't balloons. That's when they did I think there's expeditions here, the whole dummy drop thing, and this was 47 when this event. Everybody knows what happened in July of 47 because it was in an international newspaper, so it's established. So what the Air Force was doing, because they do human factors, they do aeronautical physiology kind of stuff. And so they wanted to see, well, when guys jump out of airplanes really high, what are the effect on their body, or jump off of, because they were using observational balloons. This is after World War II. So they dropped a bunch of dummies in the desert, which they did, and there's photos of that. But that was like 4 years after Roswell. So the Air Force's explanation, they had all these photos of I think there's photos in the museum here of Air Force enlisted person with arms around the dummy kind of thing.
Yeah. I think at one point we had some of the dummies here. I'm not sure
I
if
think there
they're
was.
still here. They were on loan for a little bit.
Last time I was here in Roswell was in 2001, so it's been a while. But I spent a lot of time here in the 90s. So the Air Force, we pointed out in an article in the Air Force, these dummies, you did do this, but you did this 4 years after Roswell. So how could you, this was a government publication, the Congressional Printing Office kind of document. And their explanation was, well, we have this new idea. It was like a time dilation false memory. It was like something from Star Trek. So it was like, well, what happened was people saw the dummies 4 years later, but they forgot when they saw it. So that's what they think they saw. It's like, that's just dumb. That doesn't happen.
There's people who know the delineation in the timeline that are still here.
Yeah.
And if you take your own memories, time does skew details sometimes.
Yeah, but not major events, though. You don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I could see how people may misremember time periods and things.
Yeah, I mean, like my mother finally died. She was like 98, right before the pandemic started. Right before it started. She didn't die during it or after, and I remember that because it was an event.
Sure.
So,
but the fact that they kept changing the story does not give credence to any of their stories. And that's where you're thinking, okay.
Well, yeah, it's like dealing with
it smells
Common.
like you're covering up something.
Yeah,
if
like
you
Common.
can't
You keep changing the story. What's the story? And then in the middle of this, the local congressman was a guy named Schiff, I believe, here. So he had the General Accounting Office do an investigation into records, because that's what they can do. They the funding and records and how the government's run for the whole Roswell event. And the GAO published a report. They did all sorts of searching. They couldn't find any records. The records were destroyed. Now, was it done intentionally? Was it done accidentally? Isn't it clearing out? I know there was a fire in St. Louis at some sort of records facility back in the late 40s. But everything that they had published, it would have been better for the Air Force and the government to not publish anything.
Just shut up.
Right, because
is more in this case.
It's a crazy story. I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm a hard science guy, and so I would come out here and talk to people, and I'd go back to work, and back in Houston, I'd think about stuff, and I'd go, well, could this make any sense? Is this true?
Right.
And in the public's mind, Roswell was a historical note, was gone. It was even after the Berlitz book. That book went remainder in like a month. So nobody ever thought about it. But Don and Kevin started. This was after Don Schmidt and Kevin Randall's first book was published. That's when they had to start
the research.
The very first book. But they could have kept quiet, because you know how people are. People are because of social media. We're different today. We're very distractible, but people were distractible back then. So Don and Kevin's first couple books, first one was I think 89 or 90, second was I think 94. And the 194 was a hardcover, that was pretty good for UFO books because mostly they're paperback. And they could have just said, there's nothing to it. And it would have went away. But they had to publish 2 reports. I mean, that's the best evidence I have that something definitely happened. Because they spent a lot of our tax money investigating this, and they published 2 knowingly spurious reports. And I think the very first one with the balloons, with the mogul balloon thing, the Air Force officer that was in charge of it, I don't remember his name right now, he was an Air Force counterintelligence guy. He was a disinformation guy, and they gave it to him. It's like, well, why do you think?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so.
Do you think ever they'll turn to whatever details the government has, they'll turn them, make them public?
We had many conversations up in the Chicago area at the old Center for UFO Studies office. The problem is, with intelligence, with any intelligence thing, it always boils down not to just clearance, but really to need to know.
Sure.
So, if there's some issue with like submarines, like Soviet submarines, Russian submarines and U.S. submarines, there's levels to classification. If there's an accident. There's all these classification levels. There's so many levels. I used to have a clearance. It's mind-boggling.
I know exactly. I was in the Air Force. I was.
I was Air Force ROTC originally.
Okay. So, I was a bomb loader on the 117s at Holloman.
Oh, okay.
So I had to have secret clearance to work
the
that
Nighthawks,
plane. But that got me into certain levels. But then there was other rooms that they'd laugh at you.
But ultimately, it's the need to know.
It does seem like there's a lot more credence being lent to it lately, a lot more attention being put on it with a lot more congressional hearings. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the name Mark Hoppus. He was actually a former singer for the band Blink 182.
Yes.
He has a fascination with UFOs and extraterrestrials, and so he spearheaded an effort to kind of bring research to the forefront and kind of like out into the mainstream, and a lot more eyes have been on it, a lot more people have been talking about it. And I feel like that maybe is we're closer than ever to maybe some relevance being lent to it.
It's right, but again, going back to need to know, which is how intelligence is run in all governments. It's ultimately need to know. So, like in a submarine incident with the Russians, ultimately the need to know is they wouldn't tell the president, even though he's cleared for it,
right?
Because he may not actually have a need to know.
Exactly.
I mean, and people don't understand it because intelligence isn't like here's my badge, here's my pass.
Right.
It's not that. It's like
just because a level of security gives you authorization to a certain level,
you have to have a need to know.
Doesn't mean you get access to said information.
And so, whatever we're dealing with, something happened in Roswell, and it wasn't mundane. Mundane is a word that means earthly, literally.
Absolutely.
You know, back in the 80s, people wrote books about UFOs, and they called them extra mundane. It's like you look it up, that just means extra earthly. It's like, come on. They would have moved it around. So wherever the files were or are, they'd be moved somewhere else.
Sure.
And they might. Who knows? Where's a safe place to move them? I don't know. The Federal Drug Administration, maybe. OSHA. You know. Because it's just files. It's just boxes with stuff.
Sure.
And
sitting in a room somewhere.
So, at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Some top men are handling it.
Yeah, top men.
Which this lends, the argument to, well, we need to start digitizing a lot of these files that are susceptible to fires, to thefts, to just damage over time. I think it's time to start turning our attention, maybe taking what we have on paper and putting it in maybe the cloud or someplace that is better protected.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think it was Spielberg's first major film was Jaws, which was a scare film, and second film was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which had a cameo from Professor J. Allen Hynek because it was based on a chapter in his UFO book, his first book about UFOs,
which gives that credence to the scary factor that it's
right. Well,
it's true.
So this was in the middle '70s, so I was still going to Purdue, but I was volunteering at the Center for Studies with Hynek. I was kind of Hynek's volunteer research assistant, because he knew I was an engineer and is very technical. So he's like, here, let you go through the files to find stuff. So, and we had board meetings because it was an organization, and so Hynek came in one day, goes, "Oh, this is great. I heard from Spielberg, and he wants to make a movie about Close Encounters of the Third Kind." And up to that point, all he had ever done was Jaws. And so I raised my hand. I said, "Alan, don't do that." I said, "I admit, no, I was wrong. Don't do this. Don't do that." I said, "All he ever makes is scary movies. This is going to scare people about UFOs, But luckily, he ignored me because he was way more. He was older than me. He was very, very, very mature. And he even has a cameo in the end of Close Encounters where he comes out, pulls out a pipe, which he was doing all the time in meetings. He'd pull out a pipe and try to light it and forget about it and put it back. And he came out to look at the little aliens. But I mean, even Spielberg had a real good sense for like how secrecy really is run.
Sure.
The whole best men thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the whole. I forget what the name of the landing site was in Close Encounters. Behind Devil's Tower. So Beyond the Rainbow or something like that.
Yeah. I'm drawing a blank too.
But I mean, it still sticks with me when I first saw that movie. When the government decides, well, they got that signal and it's going to say go to Devil's Tower. So what the first thing they show you, they're taking like postal vans, Piggly Wiggly, some trucks, and they're sending all supplies out to Devil's Tower in conventional trucks. Because nobody would think of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're not sending missile launchers. No, they're supposed to send Piggly Wiggly grocery trucks this way.
Whatever looks normal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
Or remember in Close Encounters, they gassed all those sheep. And they told everybody there was a pandemic. Remember that?
Yeah.
It's not the first time we've seen that.
That's true.
Yeah, a lot of full circle moments.
Right?
Yeah.
We're running out of time here, and I know you got to. What are you going to be guest speaking at any of the different?
I'm going to be some of the panels with Don and the next guest, Tom Carey.
Yes.
And I've known Don for 4 years. I know Tom Carey for maybe 32 years.
Okay.
I've been here back in the early 90s. I'd come here from Houston, meet Don here, meet Kevin Randall here, and meet Tom Carey here. Then we drive around. But all the witnesses are still around, which it was mind blowing.
It's kind of nice. You get to kind of
Yeah.
It's like riding
to
with the
have
boys.
that availability.
Yeah.
Crew kind of.
And I was working at NASA, and I had an important job because we were trying to keep the space shuttle safe. After the first explosion. And I was high profile, and I got awards, and so I was real quiet about what I was doing. I just told my friends, "Oh, I'll be back Monday," because even though if you saw in the news, I think in the last 2 or 3 weeks, NASA announced they're going to do UFO studies.
Yeah.
There's some foundation. I looked into it a little bit. There's some foundation out of New York called the Simons Foundation, some family, and. The head of the thing, he's an ex-astrophysicist. He's a retired astrophysicist. I think his name is Spengel or something like that.
Okay.
He's a legitimate guy. He's an accomplished astrophysicist, but he doesn't know anything about UFOs. So they've moved the study to them, and I saw he gave an interview. He goes, "Well, I'm going to get my best people on it. It's going to start in September, and it's going to go for 9 months, and it's only going to cost the government $100,000." I mean,
That's cheap in government terms.
That's like
no, I mean, I'm an aerospace engineer. You can't get one engineer for $100,000. So that's so. And they made a point of saying, well, we're not going to get anybody who knows anything about UFOs because we want to be prejudiced. So it's just nothing's going to happen from it.
Right.
I think it's a response. I mean, I have no proof,
Yeah.
but it's a response for all this pressure from the government and the media. Like, well, they got to do something. Like, here it looks like it's like a mini.
They're
Blue
making
an
an effort, but as little effort as they possibly
Yeah,
can.
it's
Sure.
like a Blue Book. They made an effort. I mean,
Yeah.
really, Hynek used to complain about Blue Book. We knew him after Blue Book, but all the time, like they weren't that serious. Depending on who was directing on the Air Force side of it, who the colonel was. So, the last guy. He would just spend all his time in his office at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base looking at stock portfolio things because he was retiring. So it's like,
He's looking for a paycheck and not.
well,
caring
yeah,
about-
that's
and
that's life.
That's
I mean,
life in general.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you taking some time here to talk
thank
with
you.
us. And
Yes, sir.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for
wisdom.
putting me after Don Schmidt, the Mr. Personality, the mayor of Roswell. Yes.
Yes. I jokingly call him the godfather of UFOlogy. That's kind of my
That's
unofficial
good.
moniker
He'll
for
take
him.
it. He'll take it.
But thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We'll and look forward to talking to you down the road and more stuff here
All right,
soon.
thank you.
Too.
Thank you.
Good deal. All right, it is 9:40.